So I want to ask you as we start today, close your eyes. And I want you to picture, as you close your eyes, a classroom. Think about what is in the room. What does it look like, feel like, smell like, sound like? What are people doing? What are they doing? What are they saying? How are they sitting? My guess is that as you are thinking about a classroom, many of you are thinking about the same sort of things. You're thinking desks. You're thinking cold, sterile, fluorescent lights. You're thinking students dutifully raising their hands to respond, and the teacher standing at the front of the room talking, telling stories. So as you open your eyes, I want to challenge you. What if that is not the only way to do classrooms? What if that is not the only way that you can effectively instill education and knowledge in students? I want to talk to you today because I'm a teacher. My name is Chad Lehrman, and I teach at College Station High School in College Station, Texas. Why that's significant is that College Station, Texas is the home of Texas A&M University. Texas A&M University is one of the largest universities in the United States of America. Education is important in this community. I teach students whose moms and dads are professors, leaders in academia. These are students who expect to be taught well, parents who expect education to be prioritized, and creativity to be pursued. So what I have to do is find a way to connect with students in a unique way. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background in how I came up with the concept of the Create Classroom. Create Classroom is a unique way in which those things that you imagined when you started, those things that look like this, that look like chairs and rows, sterile environments, marker boards or chalkboards, depending upon your generation, those things can still be present in a class. But with the Create Classroom, hopefully what you don't get is this. Students that aren't really paying attention, students that are bored, students that are not that end-all be-all goal that all teachers want, students that are not engaged. We want to have that. We want to have students connected. But I would argue what I've found over the last year as I've developed my classroom is that engagement is just the beginning. I want to see how classrooms can be designed and how cultures can be developed to where education and engagement is the beginning and empowerment is the goal. So, a little bit of a background. I have taught for 4 years at College Station High School. I've had 3 different classrooms in 4 years. This past summer, I was moved from a 3rd floor science lab to a 0-level hole in the bottom of the school. Now, I lovingly refer to it as the hole in the bottom of the school because it is, in fact, a hole in the bottom of the school. There are no windows in my room. It is cinder block walls, and it is a square box. It is dark. It kind of smells because it's right across from the weight room. So I have to figure out how to make my hole in the bottom of the school into a place in which students can learn. Over the past summer, I had the fortune of walking up on a conversation with George Couros, who wrote The Innovator's Mindset. Couros was having a conversation with my administrators about what could a classroom look like. And he talked about that cold, sterile rows of desks, students dutifully raising their hands. And he said, that is not how people learn. That is not how people engage when they get to college. When students can choose how they learn, they don't go to a classroom to study. Where do they go? They go to a coffee house. They sit in comfortable chairs. They have engaged conversations with each other. And then Couros mentioned this and said, what if our classrooms look more like coffee houses and less like classrooms? My principal and I made eye contact, and there was this exchange of, you got it, and I set off on this journey. Initially, what happened when I wanted to create this classroom was to just have a coffee house class. I wasn't going to change a ton about what we did. I was just going to have some couches and some different lighting, and oh yeah, definitely some coffee smells, because that works. But the more I delved into this, the more I realized that a coffee house isn't a coffee house because they have couches. A coffee house is a coffee house because of the culture that it creates. So what does that mean? So a culture of a coffee house is one in which conversation is prized. in which you go, you sit, you talk. When I was in college, I would go to a coffee house and I would study, but I would also go to a coffee house to talk with my friends, not just about the politics of the day or the news, but to have deep, meaningful conversations, to engage on a deeper level, and also to take that engagement and make action. My thought was, what if a coffee house classroom was able to develop that kind of culture? What if a classroom wasn't just saying, okay, students, raise your hands if you know the right answer? What if a classroom was students looking at a teacher saying, hey, teacher, raise your hand if you know the answer? What if the students asked the questions? What if the students learned not just how to talk to each other, but how to talk to each other with etiquette, with focus? What if they learned to really hear what their peers were saying and build the conversation from one small step up? What if we were able to create an environment where what students talked about in class and the content that they learned in class empowered them to make a change in the world outside the classroom walls? That's where the Create Classroom comes from. So you may be wondering, what does the Create Classroom mean? What's that all about? Well, the Create Classroom is centered on student voice. It's centered on this idea that what if students begin to find their passions, find the things that they're interested in, talk about it, and then do something about it. I believe that there are four major parts to student voice. The first part that I believe is the very basic part. It's the part that most teachers say, this is what I want in my classroom. I want my students to talk. I want them to be engaged. Student talk is the beginning of student voice. This looks like students sitting around, teacher asks a question, student responds. Student says, this is what I think. Another student says, yeah, I agree with that, or I disagree with that, and here's why. That's what every teacher wants. And that is so low in student voice. So imagine what it would look like if we moved to that next level, inquiry. Dan Meyer has actually done a TED Talk that I appreciate quite a bit. Dan Meyer talks about math, and he talks about how inquiry is a big part of what math should be. And inquiry just means what it sounds like. It's students asking questions. It's students developing problems. It's students developing an equation or a problem situation in math, in science, in English, in social studies, and then they put that question to their peers. The teacher's there to guide it, but it is student-focused. That's what the dream of many teachers is. And I believe that's only level 2 of student voice. Level 3 is oracy. If you have a chance, take a look at some stuff that's being done by a group called School 21. It's out of England. School 21 believes that learning how to communicate is just as important as what you are communicating. Student Voice has put out several YouTube videos, and they have a tremendous website in which they talk about the concept of oracy. Oracy is powerful. And what's really powerful is when you watch the Student 21 videos and you see second grade students sitting down across from each other saying things like this. So when you talk about diversity, I think you mean we have all different ideas and we come together and we share those concepts and then we grow from that. Second graders. I don't know 35-year-olds who talk like that. And second graders are able to connect with each other in respect and with good listening. That's real engagement. So that's what oracy is. How do we implement that in our schools? Well, we live in a time where, let's face it, our world leaders, they don't respect each other in communication. They don't talk to each other with an intent to hear the other side. They talk to be heard. What if we take our teenagers, our preteens, our second graders, and taught them how to listen to other viewpoints and not just accept it or blatantly argue against it, but to hear it and analyze it and respond in kind so that everybody hears and communicates more effectively. I think that's the beautiful part of oracy. And now we're reaching level 3. Because oracy, combined with inquiry, based in the fact that students feel like it's okay to talk in class, is going to lead to a point where students are empowered. And they're going to walk out of the doors of their classroom, and they're going to go through the halls of their school, and they're going to walk the streets of their community and into the halls of their governments, and they're going to affect change. They're going to go into labs, and they're going to affect change. They're going to go into businesses, and they're going to affect change. And it all starts with students talking, then asking questions, then learning how to speak so that they can be heard and listened to, and finally how to make things happen. So how does the Create Classroom work? Well, the Create Classroom has 5 components: collaboration, reflection, empowerment, activity, timeliness, and environment. All of those points come together to form the Create Classroom. The first point of that is collaboration. So student collaboration, group work, but it's more than group work. See, if you're creating a culture in your classroom of collaboration, what you're actually doing is creating a place in which students talk to each other, work together, and find mutual success. Group work looks like this for most of us in class. You have that kid who leads the group. That kid does 90% of the work. You have that other kid that gets the grade and does about that much work. Then you have everybody who's in between that who gripes about the guy who's not doing anything or gripes about the guy who is doing everything. And we say that's collaboration. True collaboration has to be communicative. It has to involve communication. So when we talk about collaboration in our Create Classroom, we mean kids work together. We assign people different roles. They get different jobs. I did a sociology experiment for the entire year. My students developed a perfect society. I gave them a map. That map was of an imaginary land that had different geographic features, and they were to build a society that drew from those geographic features and developed something unique. As we went on, I began to notice about the time that students started to break off into the I'm doing everything, I'm doing nothing, or I'm complaining about those two people, we created a point where everybody had a job. Everybody chose a job that they were supposed to do in that society, and it reflected the growth of society. We created collaboration. We created a situation where students talked about problems. We would throw them problem scenarios. At one point, we came out and said, okay, here's the situation. Your society is predominantly made of forests. That is your predominant source of income. There was a massive forest fire. How do you solve that problem? And students began to work together from their respective positions to create solutions to that problem. Inquiry and oracy, working together. How do you collaborate? How do you work together? Then the groups began to work with each other. Each class had 4 different nations, 4 different societies. Those societies had to eventually work together. Inquiry and oracy. How do you make these things work? And what resulted was empowerment, because the students began to think about society from a different perspective. How can we make the real world work like this? Or, in some cases, how can we make sure this doesn't happen in the real world, because that didn't go well? These are things that we have to look at and evaluate. Collaborative means you work together, not just on projects. In some of my classes, we have what's called coffee talk. In fact, all of my classes, we have coffee talk, student-led discussion. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But it's collaborative in the sense that the person who is facilitating the conversation is only successful if they can get other people to contribute to the conversation. A student who facilitates success depends upon the collaboration of its peers. Collaboration. The second thing is that it's reflective. We talk about reflection a lot in education. Are you reflecting on your practices? How do you think that lesson went? How do you think that concept went? Did you teach that well? Are our students being reflective? Or are students getting their grade saying, great, that's an A, and moving on, or, oh man, I failed that, so what? I'll do retakes. Are students really reflecting on the work that they're doing? More importantly, are we as educators creating opportunities for them to reflect? So in our class, the coffee talk, which again we'll talk about more in detail here in the next point, the coffee talk allows for reflection. The coffee talk can be content-centered. The coffee talk can be a current event that connects to the content that you're talking about in class. But in any way, you're asking students to reflect on their opinions and their thoughts. Why do they believe what they believe? I think that's a very important question to reflection. I think it can be asked whether that class is English 3 or Algebra 1 or physics. Why do you believe what you believe about the lesson that you're doing? Why do you believe what you believe about science, about Shakespeare? Why do you believe what you believe about the quadratic family? How did that idea get there? How can you make it grow? I think there's a couple of ways you could have students reflect. Discussion is a great way. But I also think that blogging is something that our students are already doing. And another easier way, use social media. Students reflect on social media all the time. They don't realize it. That angry tweet they send out, that's reflection. They're sharing their emotions. They're thinking about why they do. When they respond to it, or others respond to it and they respond to those responses, they're reflecting on it. They're engaging in conversation. Often it's not great. Sometimes it's poorly worded. Sometimes it only makes things worse. But reflection is there. We just have to figure out how to teach our students how to reflect properly and how to do it. So let's provide them opportunities in our classroom to reflect. Let them write a blog. Do a hashtag of the day on Twitter, Instagram. Share out their ideas. Reflect on their learning. And get other people's insights as well. Now, here we go. Empowerment. I believe that the student voice component, the coffee talk component, is the empowerment piece. This is what everything in the Create classroom hinges around. Are we creating opportunities for students to talk, share their ideas, and then develop an action plan on how to fix them? I got really lucky this year because my student voice component, my students began to talk about the problems that they saw in the school and in society, and our school took an initiative to create something called the Cougar Cabinet. Cougar Cabinet is an opportunity for students to come and meet with administrators and share their concerns. What happens is that voice component, where students talk about the problems in class, finds its way to the people who are in power, who can hear, listen, and give action to the concerns of the students. Or, if they can't fix those things or change those things, they can explain to students why things are the way they are. It's empowerment. If your students are talking in class, if your students are asking questions in class, and your students are engaging in oracy, they're learning how to communicate in class, but they're not taking it outside of the classroom, that's not empowerment. Learning is empowerment. If your students know how to solve a problem in the classroom, but they don't know how to connect it to real life learning, are they empowered? Or have they just got a good grade? That's a question we have to ask. How do we empower our students? How do we connect our students to their learning? Even if that learning is something that doesn't seem to have a real world application. It is incumbent upon us as teachers to find a way to show them how to empower learning in the real world. We've got to make those connections and help them see it. And the more we are willing to try to find those connections and give them those chances to empower, the more likely it is that they're going to start asking those questions and making those connections before we even do. That's empowerment. Next, active. How many of you have been in a classroom and sat for 45 minutes to an hour? Most students would raise their hands and say, yep, that's my day every day, 8 hours. I sit, I listen, that's it. What if our students are active? Get up and move around. That's a great way to do it. Now, we don't do this all the time because we have certain things we have to do. But we try to create opportunities for students to move around. My sociology class did an Olympics. Sociology Olympics. Those societies got together, they competed against little games. They were little like minute to win it type games, but there was movement involved. And they learned about competition by actually engaging in competition. My psychology students, we have goggles. These goggles are perception goggles. They shift the perspective of the wearer. Sometimes they shift it 45 degrees to the right. Sometimes they completely turn everything upside down. We spent an entire class period navigating obstacle courses, trying to shoot Nerf guns and hit a target, trying to sit down on a tall chair while walking with these goggles, walking in straight lines, avoiding other things. Did an entire class period of them moving around doing these things. And at the end, the learning piece was this. How did that affect the way you perceived the world? What were the difficulties you faced? Students gave everything from, I got dizzy, I got headaches, it was really frustrating, I couldn't figure out how to do it, it took me longer to do a basic project. Imagine watching a kid whose entire world is upside down trying to drink from a water fountain. That's funny. It's great. But then when you turn to them and say, what about somebody whose entire world is like that? What about somebody whose every day is upside down or side to side? What about your peers, your friends who are on the autism spectrum and are overwhelmed by sensory input and don't know how to handle it? What about your friends who have other disabilities where they can't do the things that you do with ease? That active learning where they moved around and struggled through their own 45-minute period of off perception, suddenly they're able to empathize with other people. That activity connects back to that empowerment piece. How do we go into society and make a difference? Timeliness. Current events have been in education for a long time. They're really relevant now. See, our students can find any content that they want, no matter what. They can find any sort of information that they need in society at the touch of a finger. That's it. They just got to go find it. So we've got to, at this point in education, be all the more mindful of being timely in what's going on. Are we telling stories in our math word problems that are 30 years old? Are we telling stories that have connections to what's going on right now? Is our English literature, are we connecting it to what's going on now? Or are we still living in Shakespearean times and only staying with Shakespearean times? Are we helping students to connect with it in the moment? History. I say that and people laugh because history is the past. Are we learning from our mistakes and the mistakes of our forefathers? Or are we dooming ourselves to repeat them? Everything is timely. Everything in education can be timely. It's about here, it's about now. It's about how do we do this? How do we make it work? Relevance. Our district uses the 3 C's and 3 R's, and relevance is one of the 3 R's, along with rigor and relationships. Are we making our content relevant to our students? Are we addressing those needs in the moment, here and now? And showing our students in a very real way how what we're learning today in math, in science, in English, in art, in foreign language, how are those things connecting to society and to our learning? And the last part of the Create Classroom, which is the actual part that I started with, the environment. How you create a place where students feel safe to learn and actually want to learn. How do you do that? Is it just flexible seating? My classroom has that. We've got chairs with tables. We've got couches. We've got a coffee bar behind a bookshelf that I built at the back of the room with raised level stools and seating. You know, we don't have one single desk. Students don't sit in desks in their careers. Students sit at tables. They sit on stools. They move around the room. They sit on a couch. But they don't sit in desks. So we create flexible seating. Students get to choose how they sit. One kid brought a beanbag. He took it home because he didn't want to share. But he brought a beanbag, and that was totally fine. The flexibility gives students choice and lets them choose where they want to sit. Something else that we found was we created an environment with low lighting. We have fluorescent lights, they're never on. We have lamps scattered around the room. We create low lighting, and what students have reported to me is this: I contribute more in your class because I feel protected. I'm not exposed. People don't see my face turn red when I talk, because when I talk in other classes, my face turns red and I get embarrassed and I stop talking. In your class, it's dark enough no one sees it, so I talk. Another student, a couple of students, who I had years before in other more traditional classes with desks and tables, these students wouldn't talk in class. They were embarrassed. They were always very cautious about what they had to say. They sit at the coffee bar behind the classroom that creates a wall between them and other students, and guess what? They don't stop talking. They have cover. The room provides a place for people who don't feel safe to share. You know what else happens? There's fewer headaches. Students do not get as many headaches when they're in my class. I don't get as many headaches when I'm in my class all day with low lighting. I spent the day a few days ago in my classroom for about 6 hours with the fluorescent lights on. I came home with a massive headache. Light makes a difference in how they learn. Because if a kid's got a headache, they're not learning. If a kid feels exposed and unsafe, they're not learning. Remember how I mentioned that I'm across the hall from a weight room? And I have coffee coffee scent going every single day, all day long, it's a whole lot better than sweat. Scent makes a difference. It creates that environment of hominess and feeling like you belong. Flow. It allows for that activity. Things are spaced so that I can move around the room. Students can move around the room, interact with each other. And that's one of the final things about the setting of our classroom. One of the other teachers on my campus that incorporated some flexible seating came to me one day and was excited and said, my students are talking to each other. And I said, well, what's going on? Well, I turned the tables around and they could look at each other. Do you realize how important eye contact is? If you're sitting in row after row after row, you don't see your peer's face. You see the back of their head. Are you able to communicate with the back of a person's head? Yeah. But does it really connect? Does it really create learning? I don't think so. It doesn't create depth of discussion. But when my students gather around the room and they sit in these weird locations and they're able to turn in their seat instead of in their desk, they're able to turn in their couch and they see each other's eyes, they connect with each other. And what's beautiful is that I have had numerous students report to me that doesn't feel like a classroom, that feels like a family. 6 weeks into the year. I have teachers who complain that in the 6 weeks they're still trying to get students to connect with each other. It's about environment. It's about timeliness. It's about activity. It's about empowerment. It's about reflection. It's about collaboration. All of them come together to form the Create Classroom. But I'm here today to tell you that it shouldn't stop in a classroom. I want the Create Classroom to stop being the Create Classroom and become the Create culture of schools. My classroom is a great place to learn. And I believe wholeheartedly in what that Create Classroom stands for. But I believe that if it stops in my classroom, I'm violating the #1 most important principle of the Create Classroom. I'm not empowering. I want my students to go out and tell the story, but I also want other teachers to believe in this and see the power of it, and see the impact that it has on learning and on student relationships and on student success. I want the Create Classroom to become the Create culture because I believe education is at the point we need it. And it's time to grow. It's time to create. Thank you.